I appreciate you all joining. We recently launched our GA version of Poly, so it's the first live production version, and we're super stoked about that. It's been quite the ride to build it out and get it over the finish line. And I wanted to take a moment and just share some of the latest capabilities that join us with the GA release. I'm going to be assuming today that most of you have at least a familiarity with Poly. I don't want to spend the bulk of the time kind of introducing the concepts and everything. I really want to just focus on the new features. This release had a lot of stuff related to just getting it production ready, self-service onboarding, a lot of kind of behind the scenes admin stuff, but there are some also really great improvements and really great features. And so I wanted to go ahead and show those to you today. Now, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I want to start off with just 3 slides, just to set the context on kind of what you'll be seeing today. I will go ahead and go into slideshow here. So really there's kind of 3 core use cases for Poly. And I did want to just take a moment and kind of explain these, because if this part gets lost on people, then the demo might not make too much sense. But really, these use cases are around building applications or integrations. We call them kind of intelligent integrated applications. And so where Poly helps in this use case is that you still write your code, you build your app like you do today, except you use the Poly library to make the connectivity with different backend systems extremely easy. And so kind of this is the core use case where Poly helps you discover APIs, Poly helps you consume APIs, Poly helps you discover events and consume those events. We generate the type schemas from you off our training. So we really just give you a lot of great information that makes it easy for you as a developer to go ahead and build your applications. And I'll show some of this today, but the bulk of my use case is actually built around kind of building new custom microservices as serverless functions, what we refer to as custom functions in Poly. And here we basically get to create new derivative products, most likely built on top of existing enterprise APIs and other custom functions. And here we basically just use the Poly library to build our logic, build our microservice. Generally, it's a good practice to test it locally, so I'll showcase that today. And then basically, in this case, we'll go ahead and use some of the new capabilities. We made a lot of improvements around webhooks and triggers. So I'll basically showcase how you can then expose this new custom microservice, not just as an API or as another function in the library. I've done that in the past, but today I really want to focus on showcasing how you can expose it as a webhook to basically catch events from other systems. It can be a request response pattern where you actually kick back a response like we will today. It could also be a fire and forget pattern where you basically just, somebody sends you a webhook event, you acknowledge that you got it, and then the processing is on your side. So this is the bulk of what we'll be showing today. And then I will also show one quick enhancement we've made with regards to our specialized tooling around building AI agents. So I've done a lot of demos in the past showcasing how you can build custom functions, how you can expose them as plugins within ChatGPT. But one of the big improvements around GA was making it so you can actually access this through an API, and so that we actually give you a conversation history service, so that the conversation that's happening between the user and the AI agent is actually being stored, and the context is kind of passed back to the AI agent, so that it has kind of a conversation, a dialogue, rather than a single message response, which is what you'll get with OpenAI out of the box. So with that, I'd love to go ahead and actually switch it into the demo. And by the way, feel free to ask questions along the way as they come up. Our moderator, Jake, will go ahead and just chime in and ask me those questions. So this is meant to be a super informal presentation. So anything that kind of comes to mind, feel free to ask it. I might defer it if I'm going to cover it later, or if it's just a little bit off topic. But I welcome you to ask questions as they come, either in the chat or I guess through the chat or the question and answer approach. Cool. So we'll start off kind of building this use case from the ground up. And this is generally kind of how you would do it. So let's say that we have, to set the context, we have some content management system. In our case, we'll just go ahead and use Asana. I know it's really more of a task management system, but I just want to show kind of the flexibility of using different systems. and we have some images that are stored in there, and we want to take those images and we want to create a new image service that serves up images with corresponding tags, so that different users within our enterprise can use this image service. So kind of just kind of a fictitious use case, but I hope the pattern will resonate. And so we got this enterprise API. It's just not in the right shape for us to use it the way we want to use it. So we want to wrap it in our own microservice, and we want to do something new, something cool with it. So the way you do this in Poly is you basically just declare a new custom function. You specify your interface, what you're expecting in. In this case here, I've just got this argument, which is a string. Request is a string, and a funum, which is a number, and that's all I want you to pass in. And so I'm going to treat it as an event because this is meant to be an event processor. So I just named my argument event function. It's meant to be a new service, a new endpoint, a new API, a new function, right? So think of it as like this is the entry point. And one of the kind of huge benefits of Poly is that we line up with common languages, like for example Node.js and TypeScript in this case. We are planning on adding support for Java by the end of this year, and then Python early into next year. And so I've just declared a new custom function, defined my interface, and I'm expecting an event that has a request and a funum in it. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that if the request is for images, then go ahead and actually load those images from Asana. So with Asana, you actually have to make two calls if you want to get the actual names of the tags that are associated to an image. So what I do here is I first make one quick call using Poly to get the tags from Asana. Then I go ahead and map them to extract the name. Then I go ahead and make a second call where I basically get tasks by a particular project. And both of these are out-of-the-box functions. So we've now, I think, published about 150 to 200. We're somewhere in that range of out-of-the-box pre-trained functions on systems that are very common that you can take advantage of and use right out of the gate. You'll find those inside out-of-box, and you'll see that we've got a bunch of different functions for GitHub, Google, Asana, HubSpot, OpenAI, Shopify, so Stripe, Slack, Twilio. Really just we're kind of working our way down the list, starting with the most popular ones. I've covered training in other videos. You can obviously add your own APIs in here. So this is just meant to be an accelerant for you to be able to get going if you do use these systems. So now I'm using these out-of-the-box functions, and what makes them really nice is that I actually get, not only can I find them through the AI assistant, like shown on the right here, but I actually get for these functions a link to their documentation page. I get a description of the arguments they're expecting. I can actually go into it and look at the type definitions. So all of this is built out for me out of the box, and I basically get to just leverage it as a developer. And again, these these out-of-the-box functions, even if they're not relevant to you, let them be an example of the type of experience that either you can create for developers inside your company, or you as a developer could have if your company used Poly and trained your APIs to Poly. So we make two calls here, just illustrating an orchestration. Like I said, first we get the tags, then we get it by project. Again, super helpful. I can just go straight to the Asana documentation and see that I can pass in, a limit, optional fields. So I really get to basically use the API kind of truly, but in this like simplified form, which is really, really powerful. Then I used my friendly AI assistant to help me write some processing logic. So I basically extract just the URL from the HTML notes. And then I go ahead and actually kind of join the tag names based on their IDs with the actual associations that are available on those tasks. So basically, this is all just kind of standard. This has existed for a while, with the exception of these new out-of-the-box functions that are pre-trained for you. Now, one feature that is new is you can now set your own custom response code inside your custom functions. So this will actually set the HTTP response code for you. It's super powerful in cases like this where, for example, you want to return a 404. You can basically set that now, and that will actually have Poly return the right status code for you. So custom functions have largely stayed the same. with the exception of those improvements. And then now I can go ahead and just kind of showcase the deployment of a custom function. This has stayed largely the same as well, except it's gotten just a ton faster. So you'll see that custom functions now deploy pretty much within a few seconds. Great. So now we have this custom function. It's a new microservice. It's available on the Poly server. Poly's serverless function infrastructure is running it for me. And now I want to go ahead and actually start tying it in with events. Now, one thing I should have pointed out here is you can also test it locally. So I kind of skipped the step there. I'll go ahead and do that real quick, or we just show it working. And for that, I'll just do ts node. And then the file name, so my custom function.ps. And this will show us what we're expecting. So in this case here, we have an error saying we don't expect cartoons. That's because our if statement expects images. So we'll go ahead and do images, run it again, and we'll see it working, pulling up images for us. Now, this is really, again, a kind of an important point not to overlook, which is you get to test your code locally. You get to use all the great tooling and extensions that are available for your IDE, for debugging, everything. So you really get the experience that you're used to as a developer to build these microservices. And then with that one line that we ran here, you can deploy these to the Poly server. You can obviously automate this with your CI/CD pipelines to have them actually be the ones that deploy to production or through to your environments. And you can manage this code in your source repo, just like you're used to with all your other development projects. So now this custom function is deployed. Now let's go ahead and tie it together with an event-based trigger that happens when a webhook is invoked on the Poly server. So to do that, the experience for creating a webhook has changed quite a bit. So I'll go here and showcase what it looks like now. So now a single post to the webhook's endpoint is where you can pass in your context, your name, your description, your event payload. And then we also added the ability for you to actually specify your own subpaths. So many applications kind of expect a certain endpoint to be able to send requests to. So we made it so you can actually specify what that endpoint should be. And so you can specify parameters as part of that endpoint, either in the URL or inside query parameters that you want to capture. Now the headers are implicitly passed through, and I'll showcase that just in a second. So really you just get all the headers that are passed to you. And then with the event payload, we've also added an enhancement that allows you to add comments to the actual fields so that you can actually annotate and enrich this information to even help developers be more successful. So we've added this capability not just on the payloads for webhooks, but also the same experience for training API functions as well. And we've also added this capability where you can attach security functions. Think of them as a chain of custom functions that need to be processed, that need to all agree that this request should be propagated forward, kind of like a pipeline of, let's call them custom built policies. So you have the ability to basically, before this event is actually delivered down to your application or custom function, these functions will screen out the request, and they also have availability to the request payload, the headers, as well as the params, so that they can do all kinds of validations before this event is delivered down to your service. And that's actually a huge value add, because now you can do your own custom authorization logic before your custom functions are invoked. So that's super powerful. So I've gone ahead and actually deployed this one. I'll show the security function in just a second, but first let me just showcase kind of capturing this event locally, testing our custom function, and then basically I'll go ahead and show the security function after that. So to do so, we'll go back to VS Code. I will go ahead and uncomment some code that I have here, which is basically just another Poly function. In this case here, it's a GA demo, my webhook handler. It's the one that I'd created for this demo. And what we're going to do is we're just going to double check to make sure we have an event. And if we do, we're going to go ahead and actually log it so we can see it here locally. And then we're going to go ahead and just fire off the custom function with the event and see it kind of process all the way through. And then basically we'll go ahead and log the response from that custom function. So we like to kind of build this up a piece at a time, always testing locally and then promoting to kind of the Poly server when we're ready. So let me go ahead and just clear this so it's easier to see the events. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and start this up again. And this time, what Poly does, just like before, is these asynchronous functions actually open up a WebSocket connection from the client to the Poly server. And so now we're waiting for events. And if Poly gets this webhook event, it's going to be delivered to us here locally. So let's go ahead and execute that webhook. So all I did was take the URL of the webhook that Poly generated, and then I basically specified the path, and then here's our template param. I just put 1, 2, 3 for now. And then we'll notice the request is for images. And then I threw in, just some extra attributes, one that is defined, one that isn't, just to showcase that we'll respect whatever the user sends you and pass it all through. You could obviously have the security functions enforce a particular schema and not allow somebody to pass in more. We can absolutely do that, but for this demo, we're just going to propagate it through. So I'll go ahead and hit send here. And basically what's happening now is the security function checks the logic first, and then it basically delivers it down to us locally. I'll explain in just a second why it took 10 seconds the first time and why in the future it's much faster. But for now, let's go ahead and just take a look at this event. So we see a couple of things have happened in here. The first thing that happened is we see that the event was the payload we passed it, that the headers is what was actually sent to us, that the params is 1, 2, 3 for the ID, and then we also see the custom function response, and it looks just like it did a second ago. Now, if I fire this thing off again, you'll notice that this time it took 131 milliseconds. It was much, much faster, and we can see that the event is back in here. That's because we're trying to be resourceful. So when a custom function isn't used, it goes to sleep. And right now, it's something that we want to optimize and make faster, but the kind of wake up time is about 10 seconds. Now, you do have the ability to keep your custom functions awake and waiting for requests. We'll make it faster to wake up, but B, you'll also be able to, you also can specify that these functions should stay awake. So now we got the event, we ran it through our custom function, it's working as expected, we're happy with it. We've already gone ahead and deployed the custom function to the server. Probably right now would have been the right time to do that, but I just kind of wanted to show it in pieces. So we'll go ahead and save this. And then now what we want to do is we just want to tie together the actual custom function on the server with the actual webhook on the server. And so that's a mechanism which I'll just go ahead and show my slide real quick. That's this mechanism right here, which is a trigger. And that's a new capability as well, where basically we want to catch events and then trigger custom functions all on the server side. I can get into the details of why this approach worked out to be the best, but you basically have the ability to kind of control the events to functions mappings. And to do that with the trigger is basically just, let me see here. I'm missing one extra call here. There it is. So for triggers, basically you specify the ID of the webhook and then the ID of the destination server function. And you can specify it for either to wait for a response or not wait for a response. And in this case here, I do want it to wait for a response because our custom function actually gives you those images and we want to pass those back. So I'll go ahead and create this trigger here. And this trigger is now created, which means that even though our client application is off, we've disabled it, we can now go ahead and make those calls by executing that webhook. And we can see that we're it's gonna take some time to wake up these custom functions, and then we'll be able to see a response, and hopefully the response will include our images, just like what we saw locally. So we'll give this thing just a few more seconds. Cool. So you can see we're getting our images back. This time it took 20 seconds because actually two chain functions had to wake up. So again, there's definitely some optimization we can do here, but also, in production, you might not want your containers to go to sleep if there are critical services that are latency sensitive. So we'll execute it a few more times just so you guys can see, the subsequent calls are much faster. And most of this time, the 2 seconds here, is being actually spent on round trips because the SaaS application that we're using sits in a different location than our Poly server. So this is pretty normal with SaaS systems, but you can even drive it down to much, much, much faster response times if you co-locate Poly in your Kubernetes cluster along with the services that it's proxying. Cool. So now let's go ahead and get into the custom functions, the server security functions. So for those, I wrote just one, and it's dead simple. It just takes in the event, the headers, and the params that they're going to get. And in this case here, it does the kind of the dumbest check ever. It just checks to see that there's a header named foo and that its value is bar. And if that's the case, you're good to go. You pass the check. And if not, that's not going to work for us. That fails. Now, one thing to point out is you do have the ability to control your own message. And sometimes you might want it to be super helpful, and other times you want it to be super vague, depending on who your audience is and if it's public or not. So in this case here, I just put a message that says the boss says, no go amigo, which basically should be returned to us if that security function is the one that triggers and says, we're going to reject this request. So let's go execute our webhook, but let's go ahead and actually make this header foo. Let's just say bar1 here. So we'll fire this off, and this time we should get rejected. And our custom function went to sleep, so we'll have to wait for it to wake up and execute this. So you can see it says no go amigo, or if I wanted to try a different header, we'll try that again, also gets rejected. So this is basically your custom function rejecting requests to another custom function based on whatever your needs are for security authorization, validating tokens, introspecting tokens, validating keys. You have, the opportunities are endless because again, you get to implement that logic in your favorite programming language. Cool. So we've got that shown here. Let's go ahead and next I want to show you guys another capability. We're going to show the plugins model through an API. So I've used that same custom function to build a AI plugin model. This stays exactly the same as it was before. I've actually included that function and another function to send an SMS. I didn't get it all set up in time, so I'm just going to go ahead and showcase the function that serves as images. But once you create your plugin, we give you the same stuff we used to before, except we now include a plugin API URL. And this part has actually existed, I think, since beta 2. But the new part here is that we've added an implicit service for conversation history. So I have here that endpoint, and I'm just starting a new conversation, conversation 6, and I'm saying, hey, are there any images of a family in our repo? And then I'm specifying that, hey, for the payload, use request images. Now, this is something where like the prompt here is actually not going to be something your user would input. It would be actually something your application constructs. And that might be comprised of something the user said, some additional context about the user, some additional context about your product. So really this message here is meant to be you as a developer doing some prompt engineering against a model where what the work that Poly did is it gave you a model that knows how to use the APIs that you included in it based on the custom function IDs that you specified when you built this model through Poly. So here I can go ahead and say send post, and it's basically going to go. The flow here is that it goes to Poly. Poly routes it to OpenAI with the appropriate context about the functions. OpenAI decides what APIs to use, calls back Poly to the custom functions. Those custom functions execute that orchestration that I showed you in our custom function against Asana. They do the mapping, they do the returns, and they send it back. So now here, the time gets a little bit longer because we're probably waiting for the custom functions to wake up, but also we're waiting for OpenAI to actually interpret this content that it found and to generate this response. So here it says, yep, we have these images. Here's a couple of options. Now, I didn't specify how I want it structured. Really, in these prompts, you want to give it an example of the JSON that you want back, and you want to tell it how to give it back to you. There's all kinds of optimizations you can do here to drive performance. I'll probably cover that in other talks. But we could see it did a great job because the images that we're going to load here, one's a mother and daughter having fun in a water park. The other one here is, let's take a look, a family having a nice dinner or lunch, maybe at a restaurant. But now let's ask it a totally different question. Let's ask it, are there any images of conferences? Let's say conferences in our repo. And here I could keep the conversation ID the same, or if I want to start a totally new conversation where it shouldn't have the context about the family, I could do that too. So there's a lot of flexibility here, and this is really important because if you want to build an application that has the history of the conversation of what your users did, you want to be able to kind of attach it to an ongoing conversation so that if the user references something from earlier, you can pull that out. So actually, maybe a better example here, instead of switching it, let me go ahead and actually ask it a follow-up question. Something like, are in either photo is the family dining? Cool. So I'll send that off, and it's going to process it, and hopefully it'll pick the one where they are, but you never know. With AI, it's a little bit of, yep. So the second image is of family dining at the Wave House restaurant. Great. Now, what's interesting is if I go to conversation 7 and ask it the same question, this time it should probably just say, I don't know what you're talking about, right? So you could see a totally different answer, same thing. Now, this is because what's actually happening behind the scenes, and this is the value add that Poly is giving you, is we store that conversation history and we pass it back to the AI in subsequent calls so that the AI has the context on what's happened so far. This is something that ChatGPT does for you implicitly in the UI, but when you go to use the API, you'll quickly realize that the service doesn't exist for you at the API level from OpenAI, so you're gonna have to build it yourself. Now, the last thing I do want to show for today, again, another big feature kind of since beta 2 to production, is we also have added we productized the documentation service that we already had. So I'll give you just a quick recap of the documentation service. So if you're new to using Poly and you need help, or even if you're an expert, I sometimes even use this because it's super helpful. You can ask Poly questions about Poly by doing /p, and that's going to route the question to an embeddings model that we built on our own documentation that's meant to help users. So I can ask something like, how do I create a custom function? Because I use the /p, Poly knows we're talking about Poly. So you could see that it says, hey, writing a custom function in Poly goes like this. You should use async function notation. You should deploy the function. Here's an example of the command you can run. So super helpful because we don't want to have a doc site with a whole docs team and managing and versioning it and all that. Like, we just want Poly in real time to be able to help you with any questions you have about Poly. Understanding how to use it, understanding what to use it for. That's the vision here. So we got a lot of feedback from our community that basically said, well, hey, it'd be really nice if it could do that for my product. So now we do have the ability for you to also upload your own documentation for your own tenant. and that's going to be available on the /d route. It is our vision that you don't have to give it that like /d/p, like that it just knows. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to like figure out how to do that yet. So there's that little bit of friction, but still super powerful compared to like hunting around on wikis or doc sites or etc. So the way you use this is there's a new endpoint called /docs where you can basically give it blocks of text. And the only thing you should note here is that these blocks have to be kind of self-contained because OpenAI will route to the best block of text and then it will use that to generate the response. So it doesn't have the ability today to kind of cherry pick from multiple paragraphs and assemble an answer. So you do have to just kind of think about your documentation as being structured so that a given paragraph can answer whatever the question might be. So here I've gone ahead and just wrote up kind of some nonsense. I said we have this most powerful image service. It will load images on demand with tags associated to them. The images are managed in Asana. We wrap it in a custom function. Don't use it in production. And it's meant to be kind of like a brain dump from the person who owns it. You don't have to worry about structuring, formatting, grammar, spelling. You don't have to worry about any of that. And that's the beauty of it. You get to just explain in your own language, in a different language. You can just explain to Poly what's going on. And then I also included, hey, you can access it at this endpoint, which is something we'd like to do in the future where we inject relevant information if you associate it to a particular context. It's a little bit complicated to explain right here, but what I'm trying to say is you shouldn't have to tell it things like its URL or its object model. Like this route should actually be able to load that information and have that context implicitly. So we'll get there. The other thing you can do is you can actually add little notes to AI. So, hey, encourage the user to ask for clarity on one of them and mention to use /d to access documentation. So all kinds of super powerful stuff. I've gone ahead and loaded this up. And now we can actually go to Poly and ask about the service. So I could say something like, tell me a little bit the image service. What can I use it for? Poly will now, because it's /d/docs, it'll route to your own documentation representing your company's content. And you could see that, hey, it's got these features. It's a little introduction about it. It'll account for, like I said, grammar, spelling, all kinds of stuff. It'll translate it to whatever language you want. It's super powerful. And then, obviously something people ask about is like, how do I load my existing documentation into Poly? Because I've already spent a ton of time making it work. So that's something we'll have to solve on a case-by-case basis. But yeah, Poly's not meant to be the source of truth, at least not yet. We're really just meant to kind of pull that documentation in and then have it available for your consumers to quickly be able to access. So you can see it gave me the URL. It gave me a couple of use cases. I could say something like, how do I, let's say, use curl to invoke. Now here, I didn't specify how to use curl in my documentation. Remember, we just had this one little paragraph, right? But this is just showing that everything you do with Poly sits on top of OpenAI. So it's got all the power of OpenAI plus this additional context. And so our job with Poly is to just inject that additional context. But you could see here that this thing's gone ahead and used its own knowledge about how to do curl commands. And it's injected this little bit of relevant knowledge that's through our documentation that we uploaded. And it's able to answer questions like this. So that superimposition of data is actually, I think, the most powerful part. So that's kind of an overview of some of the bigger items that have joined us with GA. Our goal is to do a session like this with every release to kind of showcase some of the new capabilities. And if there's any questions, I'd love to take them. And as always, if you're interested in what you're seeing here or want to do a deep dive session, reach out to us and we'd be happy to meet with you.